New speculation about potential progress in the Russia-Ukraine peace talks, with President Trump's deadline looming. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and French President Emmanuel Macron both saying Trump's typical two-week deadline becomes reality tomorrow. Macron saying if Russia doesn't commit to face-to-face talks, quote, it means once again President Putin played President Trump. Well, joining me now is Michael McFaul, former U.S. ambassador to Russia, now MSNBC international affairs analyst. Ambassador, welcome. Good to see you, my friend. So in an interview with the Daily Caller on Saturday, Trump was doubtful about the prospect of a meeting. Trump also said, quote, maybe they have to fight a little longer. I mean, he said that before. Is President Macron right saying that Trump is being duped by Putin? I'm curious your response to Trump's remark that they need to fight a little more.
Well, tragically, I think President Macron is right. President Trump keeps making bluffs. He keeps making these red lines. He draws these red lines in the sand. Earlier it was about a ceasefire. I'm going to be very disappointed if we don't get a ceasefire. That's what he said before going to Alaska. Then he backed away from it. Then he set this other deadline, as you just described. It's up tomorrow. If they don't commit, then what? He's got to have a response when Putin doesn't do what he asks him to do. And that, I think, has been the fatal flaw of Trump's strategy so far, is that he has not thought about what are the consequences if he doesn't move.
Well, he is reportedly fuming that his attempts at diplomacy have so far yielded nothing. He threatened consequences if Putin and Zelensky don't meet, saying he will, quote, see whose fault it is. So if a summit does not happen, what consequences might he be implying?
Well, first, let's be crystal clear. The fault is Vladimir Putin. When the president and other administration officials kind of wish and wash on this, and they kind of make it sound like we're not clear who invaded whom, and we're not clear who's stalling. It's crystal clear. President Zelensky has said repeatedly he's ready to meet without conditions, anytime, anywhere, except Moscow, by the way, with Vladimir Putin. So the second, the president has to put in place some consequences. He has to impose new sanctions, and not just on the Indians, by the way, directly on the Russians, directly on Russian banks that are still not sanctioned, directly on the so-called shadow fleet that ships Russian oil around the world. He can and seize their assets. We still have 5 to 10 billion Russian central bank assets in the United States. He needs to do that. And second, he needs to announce his new military assistance package for Ukraine. It's great that he's allowing the Europeans to buy them from us, but it is atrocious to me and embarrassing to me that we are now profiting from the war in Ukraine. That's wrong, and it's also not strategic. He needs to say, we're going to do more, because if they are going to fight, they need the ability and the means to keep fighting on.
Why doesn't Trump strong-arm Putin?
I don't know. I honestly do not understand it. I know that he looks weak, and not just to me, and not just to Americans, but to Europeans. He looks weak in China. He looks weak in Taiwan. Those are countries I've just visited in the last couple of months. When he makes threats and doesn't follow through, he looks very weak. And I think that has negative consequences for American national interest, not just in Ukraine and Europe, but around the world. I hope the president himself, or at least advisors around him, will begin to explain why making threats and not following through undermines your credibility as the president of the United States.
Look, there are others who can't figure out what's going on, because there's been little public progress toward ending the war since that flurry of diplomacy a few weeks ago. Russia has not budged. It has ramped up airstrikes on Ukraine, and the U.S. has not firmly committed to any security guarantees for Ukraine. And European officials say they are baffled over what the U.S. took away from both Trump and Witkoff's discussions with Moscow. But big picture, Ambassador, where does this leave Ukraine and Europe?
Well, I'd say two things. First, it's really important to underscore what you just said, that since President Trump has returned to the White House, Putin's war against Ukraine has increased dramatically. So when he says it's Biden's war, not his war, no, this is a much bigger war now on Trump's watch, and he has to do something about that. Secondly, with respect to the negotiations, I just don't see any progress until there's more pressure on Moscow. But if there is progress, there's a fundamental change in the strategy. Trump cannot negotiate with Putin about security guarantees for Ukraine. That was allegedly, that's what the special envoy Witkoff read out. He said they talked about security guarantees in Alaska. That's not a conversation you have with Putin. The conversation with Putin is with Zelensky about where the borders are between those two countries. And then the second negotiation, independent, completely independent from Putin, is a conversation about security guarantees, because he cannot have a veto about what we and our allies do with respect to security guarantees with the Ukrainians.
Look, the German chancellor said earlier today, Ukraine has got to hold the line. They cannot do a peace deal that involves ceding territory that was taken because Putin invaded them and stole it, because what that indicates is potentially Germany's next, or any other of the European countries are next. So where does this go? I mean, if people are pushing, people, maybe the United States, saying, look, you know what, Zelensky, you're going to have to cede some territory. What happens if he does that?
Well, first, it is a threat not just to Ukraine and European security, but to the international order that was created after World War II to prevent annexation by imperialist expansionist powers. That's why we fought World War II, right? When the Japanese invaded China, when Hitler and Stalin invaded Poland, that was the beginning of wars of annexation. And then we got together and we said, we don't want to do that anymore. And it has been tremendously successful up until 2022, when Putin launched this full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So allowing this precedent, I think, is deeply dangerous. But it would be more dangerous if Putin takes more territory. And that's why the free world, Europe and the United States, need to give Ukrainian warriors the assets they need, the military weapons they need, including long-range fires to attack Russian targets, so that they can stop this imperial expansion. Because if we just let it go on, then just as you're intimating, other countries will also be threatened.
Ambassador Michael McFaul, always good to talk with you. Thank you so much.